Queensland Premier Stephen Miles, well, he still thinks that he can just jump his way through openly lying, as we all know he did in the Queensland Parliament. Here he is laughing about youth crime when asked about it. Oh, but of course he wasn't really laughing about youth crime, despite the fact the question was about youth crime. Now, you know by now what all this is about. It is about a text message that the then Deputy Premier sent to a fellow Labor MP, telling them to jump up and cause some trouble in the Parliament to delay proceedings. You also know that he turned around and when was asked about this in question time, said, no, didn't send anything. No proof whatsoever. Then, of course, he had to turn around and admit it after that photo was published again on 9 News in Brisbane last night.
I wish to update the House and advise that I, as the member for Murrumba, did text the member for Palmerston during question time, which was the subject of the member's question. The text message was from some time prior and I did not recall it at the time. I therefore wish to correct the record and apologise to the House for the error.
What rubbish. I'm smart enough to be the Premier, but I'm not smart enough to remember the communication that was fairly lengthy with your own MP when you were trying to change the subject inside Parliament. Now, lying to Parliament in and of itself should be a resignation offence, it should be a sacking offence. But when you're the boss, who's going to sack you? When you've just been newly installed as the leader, who's going to roll you? But the reality is that if you don't have politicians that adhere to a standard that you can't lie in the chamber, well then there is nothing that you can trust about a government. And I've got some more examples about that, about the Queensland government right now. But what about the excuse given up by giggling Miles, the one who says, I wasn't laughing about youth crime when you clearly saw him laughing about youth crime, the one who says, I didn't lie to Parliament, I just Joe Biden'd and kind of forgot. Well, a third excuse has now been offered by Stephen Miles to the baying media in Queensland today.
As I've indicated, I made a mistake in answering that question. It was a very busy question time. Remember, that's the question time we extended, where there were lots and lots of questions. I answered that one too rapidly. I made a mistake. I've apologised.
So he remembers the question time. He just doesn't remember what he did in the question time. He lied to Parliament, and he should be out of his job tonight. At the very least, the Ethics Committee should be investigating all of this, surely. But even then, it's a stacked deck, and obviously they're going to let the Premier off the hook this close to an election. But again, the people of Queensland need to know the types of people who lead them. If they're willing to lie about stuff like this, what else do they lie about? Well, an awful lot when it comes to the Queensland government. But as I predicted last night, the Ethics Committee is not investigating the Premier for lying to Parliament. Instead, it is now about to investigate the politician who asked him about whether or not he lied, because that is the politician who took the photo of the text message that proved that he was lying. So just as I predicted, the Premier who should be gone for lying is now going to hide behind a system that will punish the person who outed him for lying.
It was I, having made a snap decision, that took that photo. I unreservedly apologise to the member for Palmerston for the invasion of the member's privacy. In addition, I unreservedly apologise to the House for my indiscretion.
You have to apologise when you catch them lying red-handed. That's the Queensland that exists right now. Queensland, you got a choice. You know what I've said to do over multiple elections. I plead for you to do it again, hopefully this time. But another lie about Stephen Miles. Now, you may remember towards the end of last year, the Labor Party, when it was breaking one of its many, many promises that it has since coming to power, did so around infrastructure spending. They took about $33 billion out of what were all programs that had been promised or announced or put out press release or mentioned during election campaigns because they knew they couldn't afford it. But as always, when you take money away from a state governments react like this.
The Queensland Government will not cop cuts to infrastructure programs here in Queensland. All of the infrastructure we have planned is necessary. In fact, indeed, we need even more.
The Treasurer was singing from the same song sheet.
The infrastructure cuts announced this morning by the Federal Infrastructure Minister are a body blow to Queensland. Queenslanders will be forced to wait longer in traffic, drive on more dangerous roads and suffer from a higher cost of living. My message to the Federal Minister is simple. Do not try to rope us into your bad decisions.
And then we had the nonsense of the then Deputy Premier, now self-admitted liar because it was a busy question time, but I don't remember what happened in the question time. The one who giggles about youth crime, but definitely didn't giggle about youth crime. That's your fault for noticing. Well, he was sent by the then Premier, Anastasia Palaszczuk, to Canberra to scream, spit and rave to the federal government. This is a photo of him arriving for the apparent sessions. Well done to the Courier Mail, because they have now been able to prove via freedom of information legislation the whole thing was rubbish. The whole thing was garbage. They were blowing up Deluxe. They were sending themselves to Canberra. But what they were really doing behind closed doors was, look, mate, I just have to be here for a show trial. Anyway, how are the kids? Secret documents compound government's trust issues. This was an email that was sent from the federal government to the Queensland government, which basically says, and it's the receipt, that they knew what was coming. How could they be blowing up about what they had apparently negotiated with the federal government? As I'm sure you're all expecting, given a number of recent discussions over the last few days, meaning they knew what was coming, I just wanted to give you a heads up that we anticipate that Minister King, that's the Infrastructure Minister, will make her announcements tomorrow, the same ones that they pretended to not know about, blow up about and send Miles to Canberra for. With regards to the infrastructure investment program, including around the changes to the project's lists as negotiated with your ministers. As well as being the Deputy Premier, he was the Infrastructure Minister at the time. So he was arguing against something that he and his office had negotiated, and he made it look like he was fighting the decision by going to Canberra after the announcement was made about what he knew was coming. The email concludes, I understand that all your ministers and or officers have also been notified. So he lies about what happened in question time. He lies about what he and his people negotiated when it came to the infrastructure money coming from Canberra. Now, I know normally it's 3 strikes are out, but this is about strike 3,000 for this Queensland government. And another example of their behaviour, remember last week the Supreme Court in Queensland said that compulsory vaccinations were not fair, not allowable and unlawful, particularly when it came to the police and nurses. Many hundreds of people have not been allowed to return to being frontline support workers like nurses or police officers because they, by their own health decision, decided not to get the jab. Now, of course, we all know this many years on that the jab was all about making sure that if you got sick, you wouldn't go to hospital, but it didn't stop transmission. So therefore, the idea of it being absolutely compulsory doesn't really stack up. So despite the fact that the court has called this unlawful, guess what the health minister in Queensland, Shannon Fentiman, the one who wanted to be the Premier after Anastasia Palaszczuk, but was rewarded by keeping the same job that she had before she tried to be Premier under Stephen Miles, giving her a little bit of punishment, one lefty on another, a bit like Albo and Tanya Plibersek. Oh, but Albo really cares about women in Australian politics. The health minister has now confirmed that the disciplinary action that's been taken against the COVID nurses will continue. The Supreme Court has called it unlawful. The health minister says, no, I'm just going to ignore it. Why? Because we're the greatest government of all time. Why? Because we tell you over and over and over and again. We can lie to your face, we can ignore what the court decides, we preside over a health system where the ramping has been the worst it's ever been, where people die while waiting on 000 or die in the back of an ambulance waiting to get into a hospital, or members of the public have to drive the ambulance because the single paramedic in regional Queensland is treating the patient in the back. I say it again, Queensland, over to you. Get rid of them. Meantime, another lesson in how the economy works. Albonomics, put simply, great for Canberra, terrible for you. Today we got the national accounts figures. Put simply, it shows that the economy is growing at virtually snail's pace, like 0.2 or 0.3%, nothing. It's exactly the same as the previous 3 months. The reality, of course, though, is that we're all involved in a thing called a per-capita recession, which means the government's fine, but you, the household, the individual, the citizen, the taxpayer, is not. Here's Jim Chalmers giving himself 25 out of 10 because, you know, he can mark his own homework.
Slow growth is still significant growth given the challenging global conditions combined with the impact of higher interest rates here in our own economy. Now, we need to remember that towards the end of the year, Japan and the UK both went into recession.
Oh, because we're better compared to Japan. Please. What about comparing Australia with Australia? And again, a per capita recession. Now, I don't have an economics degree, but it's pretty easy to work out what that means. Feel free to Google it yourself. Among others, the ABC, the Australian Bureau of Statistics, and plenty of others will help give you a definition. But it's about your circumstances, not the overall circumstances of the economy. It puts into place not just inflation, but taxation, all sorts of things, which means you are going backwards. And even the ABC reported today that this is yet another 3 months on top of the previous 3 months, on top of the previous 3 months, on top of the previous 3 months, when we, the citizens, have been going backwards on a per-person basis. The Australian economy shrank by 1% over the past 12 months to December. That means a recession. We're in the middle of a household recession. Peter Martin, their economics editor, also went on to say this about the recession that you and I are living, but the government isn't because you and I don't take taxes from the mining industry. Whatever Wednesday's data shows, the truth is that we are already experiencing the biggest dive in living standards in half a century. This isn't me, this is the ABC finally saying it. And we have been for 2 years. Adjusted for our current very high rate of population growth, the GDP per person is extremely weak. It's been falling and barely growing for 3 quarters now. Remember, 2 quarters of negative is a recession. This is now 3. It shows weak spending, rising prices, a greater tax take, and much greater payments on mortgages have been shrinking living standards over the past 2 years. You see, it's not just a random number in the air that are interest rates. As we've shown you how many times, that people are having to find tens of thousands of dollars more to pay off the mortgages that they have, from $750,000, $500,000, $1 million, $1.5 million, like many people do around the country. And that's how it felt for the past 2 years, and that's why the pain is being spread different than it was in the past. Here's a graph to make the exact same point, and that may be easier for some people to see. What you can see on the far right of your screen, that's the grey area. That's been the past couple of years. We hit a high just before 2020, then it went down, it's kept going down, and the household share of disposable income is low. The per capita recession puts us in the lowest living standards in the best part of a century. The best part of, half a century, as the ABC put it today. Hence why the Shadow Treasurer was able to hit them right between the eyes today. The recession for you and me, but not for Jim Chalmers and Anthony Albanese.
National accounts out today. They are a shocker, an absolute shocker. It's clear now, Australians are experiencing a recession.
The only people who aren't are the people who, of course, get to pat themselves on the back because they've given you $15 a week of your own money, while taking $1,500 off 10 million people, while increasing petrol taxes, increasing booze taxes. Welcome to Albonomics. He's all right and bugger you. Like everyone else, I'm going to have to take note of what Tony Burke's been up to recently. Now, he was in America to take part in this international dialogue, which is a mixture of social climbers, political people, media people, and they all stand around and talk about how important Australia and the United States are at working together there. It's behind the scenes a big bashing up of Trump's session. They talk in code about China. Now, why he had to be there, I've got no idea. But also, this thing is privately funded, which means why did we pay for him to go? As you know by now, $57,500 was spent on business class flights, on accommodation, food, hire cars, making sure he had an extra fast diplomatic passport. Why this wasn't, of course, the case as the second somebody's sworn in as a minister, I don't know. But what do you think the media spent more time talking about today? Yes, this was in the Telegraph. Yes, we talked about it on Sky News. Oh, no. We have to talk about Peter Dutton. Peter Dutton's travel is way more important than the travel you and I have been paying for, $57,500 worth, because Peter Dutton flew to Perth for Gina Rinehart's birthday. A birthday, by the way, where she gave multiple versions of $100,000 away to her workers. Good luck to her. She's Australia's biggest taxpayer. But this has been described as a disgrace, as something that should not have happened, as obscene. So somebody might like to tell me what is obscene about him flying to Perth to talk to Mrs. Rinehart. Tony Burke went over on a know-nothing mission which cost $57,500. Guess how much it cost the Australian taxpayer to fly Peter Dutton to Perth? Nothing. He paid his own way. That's the reporting that's around today, is that he paid his own way. So what exactly is the story here, apart from trying to ooga-booga about all of these people? Again, the rest of the media talking about this because we're at all times got to talk about Peter Dutton. Why? Because, as you know, what's Albo's central focus? What is the media obsessed with? When all else fails, talk about Peter Dutton. Let's turn him into Aussie Trump. Let's make him Morrison 2.0. Let's make him the ogre that Turnbull also wishes him to be. Which is why there's a dirt unit inside the Prime Minister's office, first reported by James Campbell in the Herald Sun a few weeks ago. Its entire purpose is to dig up dirt on Peter Dutton. So either the dirt unit was doing its job or the media was just willing to do it for them, just to show how grateful they would be if they got more information from the dirt unit of the Prime Minister's office. What a happy little club they run down there in Canberra. When a bloke spends that much money, taxpayer money, Tony Burke, no story. When somebody spends his own money to go and see Australia's biggest taxpayer, a great Australian and a mate, by the way, of his, disgraceful. He paid his own way.